welcome to Croatia. It's the first time for you here, right? And when we met in Shanghai in December last year, when I proposed to you that you come here, you were quite excited, I would say. So you knew already quite a lot about the country. So it's good to have you here. Just for the benefit of everybody, I'll give a brief introduction about Eric. Eric is from Shanghai. He's a venture capitalist, founder of Chengwei Capital, which is a successful venture capital fund in China. He studied in the US, so he did his bachelor's degree at Berkeley and did his MBA at Stanford, and then PhD in political science at Fudan University. He has a very successful TED Talk that has gone viral. Some of you have seen it, and it's really good to have you here in Croatia. So the way we're going to do this session is I'm going to give Eric about 15 minutes to lay his case on the current state of affairs in the world which relates to China, and then we're going to I have a couple of questions for him, and then we're going to open it up for the Q&A. I'm sure it's going to be I'm sure you will have quite a lot of questions for Eric, so hopefully we'll be able to answer all of them. So Eric, welcome.
Thank you, Mato, for the introduction. Good morning or good afternoon. I'll be brief so we can go to lunch. It's great to be in Croatia. I love it. It's the only country in the former Yugoslavia that I have not been to. This is my first time. I remember many years ago, 20-some years ago, in the late 1980s and early 1990s, when it was still in Yugoslavia, I came as a student. I was studying the history of the Habsburg monarchy. So this was the frontier of the empire. And I loved it so much then. And the place has changed so much, of course. Borders have changed. Identities have changed. And, you know, I miss the old days. But I like the new days, too. Today, I have a big topic, but a simple message. The big topic that the organizer assigned me is the state and future of globalization. And the message is a simple one. I think you all know, you don't need me to tell you this, that globalization is in trouble. It's in big trouble. If you don't know this, you're really out. And we're not going back. It's over. The globalization as we know it. And here's why. Let me explain. And the second message is, will globalization continue in some form, and how? And I think it will, and I think it should. And if we do not foster a new kind of globalization, the world will go backwards. And no one in the world will know better about what going backwards means than the people in this region. And I know the history. Globalization, that's a brief review of history, started as a concept, as a very innocent concept in the 1970s. It simply meant that driven by economics, technology, and the movements of people, there will be increasing interconnectedness or interconnectivity among peoples and nations of the world. Okay, so it's a really simple concept. It started in the 1970s. But it experienced a qualitative change in the early 1990s after the Cold War, at the end of the Cold War. And I like to make the distinction between globalization and globalism. And at the end of the Cold War, that was when globalism as an ideology was injected into globalization. And I call it hijacking globalization. And the ideology of globalism was essentially based on the doctrine of neoliberalism, and it manifested at a practical level through what was called the Washington Consensus. And at that time, the US and its Western allies led a drive to universalize Western values. And those Western values have three components: politics, economics, and international relations. In the political arena, it was to universalize the political system of liberal democracy. economically to universalize the economic system of market capitalism. And in international relations, a set of institutions to manage the relations among nations, whether it's IMF or WTO or what have you, okay? And the idea was that we're going to an era where when universal standards based on Western values in political governance and economic management and international relations will spread the world over. So everybody would be doing things in the same way, by the same standards around the world, regardless of where you came from, what your culture is, what your political system is, everybody will be the same, okay? And looking back in the last over the 20, 30 years, I must say that in one respect, globalism was a great success. I call it the Great Conversion. What was the Great Conversion? If you look at the numbers, in the 1970s or 80s, there were, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but you could search online, okay? Based on the rating of Freedom House in America, or the Wall Street Journal or Heritage Foundation ranking of liberal economies or free economies, you will see that in the 70s or 80s, before the end of the Cold War, there were only maybe 40 or 50 countries who were classified as liberal democracies, and maybe similar number as market economies. Now, the number has doubled or tripled. Never in the history of mankind has so many countries given up whatever political system or economic system that they had and adopted something totally new. Okay, so that was a great success. But globalization, this globalization, globalization injected with globalism has also generated great failures. What are the failures? Let's look at the new countries that adopted the Washington Consensus, the neoliberal doctrine, the 50 or 70 or 80 new countries, yeah? I grouped them into 4 groups, mostly. First group, I counted about 29 countries. Those were the former Soviet states and former East European Warsaw Pact countries, okay? And that's the most fortunate group. This group has done better than any other group. However, even among this particular group, there are probably fewer than half of the countries that you could say have truly achieved success. Most of the Caucasus, countries in the Caucasus, and the stand countries, so-called, are not successful. Russia itself was not successful for a long time. Ukraine being the worst, one of the worst. And even in Eastern European countries, if you look at Hungary, Poland, many of those countries are regretting many of the things they adopted, and they want to change, and they're fighting a battle to change, to regain their national sovereignty, and to regain their ability to how to run their countries, okay? So there's a lot of dissatisfaction, although this group has the highest number of success stories. You know, Croatia is one of them. Czech Republic, Poland seem very successful, okay? But of that group, maybe only half are moderately successful. Second group are countries and regions that achieved developed country status under authoritarian, dictatorial political systems. And then they adopted the Washington Consensus, liberal democracy and market economy, after they got rich, okay? And those places, for example, are like South Korea, Taiwan, South Africa, places like that, yeah? Of those, the record was about 50-50 at best. South Korea continued to succeed. Taiwan has been deteriorating. South Africa has been deteriorating, okay? Not doing so well, that group. Third group was the largest, the large number of developing countries, from Southeast Asia to South America to Latin America to Africa. You cannot find one success story. That's the amazing thing. Virtually all of them are still lagging way behind on development, at poverty level. Those who are fighting civil wars are still fighting them, or at least in civil strife. The globalism has not solved any of their problems and only made them worse. Okay. And the fourth group, the latest group, latest addition to that column, of course, are the countries of the Arab Spring. And I call it the Arab Winter. We all know what happened to them. Okay, not one came out ahead. Every single one of them came out behind, way behind. So globalism in the developing country. And let's look at globalism in the developed world. It's doing even worse. Globalism-led globalization created tremendous economic benefits. We see that in the economic numbers, GDP, profits, what have you, okay? For the developed countries, America and Western Europe. But vast majority, the most of those benefits went to the very top. Okay, the middle class in all those developed countries has been collapsing. It's the amazing thing. If you compare China and America, for instance, both countries benefited tremendously from globalization. Okay, if you look at GDP growth, look at surpluses, they've all gained a large amount of wealth. But China's GDP grew 10x, maybe, around, okay? And China's median income grew about 8 times. In America, America's GDP grew also tremendously, 4 or 5 times, from a much larger base. Yet, their median income has been dropping, stagnant and dropping. Isn't that amazing? Where has the money gone? And if you go to Paris, go to the streets on Paris every weekend, you see them wearing these yellow vests, and they'll tell you where their money has gone. Okay, and if you go even in Germany, Germany is the most successful country in Europe. There's so much dissatisfaction. So we see a tremendous backlash against the elites who led this wave of globalization or globalism. And that's, I think, will only intensify and spread. So what does that have to do with us? China has been the only exception. Among just about among all major countries in the world, China was the only one who engaged globalization and benefited from globalization the most, yet it rejected globalism decisively. It said no to the political system of liberal democracy. It said no to market capitalism. It was pointedly not market capitalism. It's socialism with Chinese characteristics, which is fundamentally different.
But some form of market capitalism
economy
exists,
yes,
yeah.
But not capitalism.
How do you distinguish them?
Oh, I distinguish them simply by saying that in capitalist society, in the country of capitalism, capital is an independent power. Capital can determine the future of a country. In China, in a socialist country, we have tremendous capital, great entrepreneurs, lots of wealth, but capital is beneath political authority. Our national political authority will never allow capital to determine the future of our country.
So
all right, in America, 100 wealthiest people in America will have an outsized influence on the future of an American political establishment and the direction of the country, okay? In China, the wealthiest country, the 100 or 500 wealthiest Chinese people will have zero influence over our Politburo and our Central Committee, zero. Okay, so that's the difference between a capitalist country and a socialist country. So, and the role of capital, of course, is borderless. Capital is not committed to the land. Capital is not committed to culture. Capital goes wherever it can make the most money. So it's different. And that's why you see all this backlash in developed countries and developing countries alike, because people want their lives taken care of. They don't want to just be ruled by capital. So China is the only country that's been successful in this globalization process. It's developed a tremendous economy, became the second largest economy by nominal terms and largest by PPP. It's now the largest trading nation in the world by far, and the largest trading nation in history, by the way. I think 115 or 120 countries count China as their largest trading partner. Only 63 count the US as their largest trading partner. So we've done this, and we've lifted 800 million people out of poverty in the process, and we're continuing on that process. We're not there yet. Now, something else is happening in the world. The United States and its Western allies, but the US is leading this, confronted with these problems of globalization, seems to have decided to lead an effort to deconstruct and destroy the institutions of globalism that it built. Okay, and that's unprecedented. It's never happened sort of in the history of conflicts. If you read Graham Allison's latest book about Destined for War and all those conflicts among great powers, and I was talking to him, I said, have you seen an instance like that, like this? He said, no. What is it? The leading power, the incumbent leading power, is dismantling the system it built by itself for its benefit. It wants to ditch it. And of course, you have all those other countries, especially in Europe, that have built their systems based on the belief that the US-led system will continue forever, for another 2,000 years. You're in trouble. What are you going to do? Okay, so that's another interesting and amazing thing, and unprecedented thing that's happening in the world. So what are we proposing? We look at 16+1 or 17+1. We look at Belt and Road Initiative. China, I think, is proposing a new form of globalization, a globalization that's liberated from the ideological shackles of liberalism, a globalization that's non-ideological, a globalization that allows the space for countries to develop their own paths, that does not seek to impose a set of political and economic values onto other countries. A globalization that respects national sovereignty. It respects differences. A globalization of diversity, of pluralism, I like to call it. President Xi Jinping used to say that it's like a pair of shoes. Whether or not they fit, only you could tell when you walk. So I think the Chinese approach is going to make a difference in the world, I hope. Through the Belt and Road Initiative, through 17+1, through other initiatives, China's proposition is still a nascent proposition. It's a new proposition. There are going to be a lot of problems, a lot of issues, but it's a new idea that I think the world should entertain, which is that we want to promote interconnectivity, promote globalization, but respect cultural and civilizational integrity, respect national sovereignty, and let each country discover and pursue their own development paths. Thank you.
Thank you. You mentioned countries like South Korea, Taiwan, that have gotten rich essentially during the periods of dictatorships and then eventually have liberalized and became democratic. Some have hoped in the West that this would happen with China. What do you have to say to those people with those aspirations?
Well, they did have those aspirations, but we didn't do it, and we came out ahead. So I'm a venture capitalist. I look at results. If you look at these other countries who liberalized, like I said, I counted. I use 3 examples, right? Countries or regions: South Korea, Taiwan, and South Africa. Maybe you can count some Latin American countries like that too, Chile or whatever. If you look at those countries, I would say South Korea is the only real success story. After they liberalized, they continued to prosper and grow. And the other countries, among them, some of them really deteriorated badly. Some of them just stagnant, not going anywhere.
Yeah, okay.
So bad track record.
Bad track record. Do we have any questions from the audience before I continue with Eric? Okay, maybe then, Eric, how do you comment what's currently then? You mentioned briefly that the US is, in a pretty unprecedented way, dismantling the system it helped build in the first place. And how do you feel that this trade war that is currently taking place will play out? And what will be China's reaction to it? I mean, we can't say we didn't see it coming. Eventually, especially from the American side, it feels now that there is a consensus both on the Republican as well as the Democrat side that is very entrenched against China in a way. So even if the next president turns out to be from a Democrat side, I don't really feel that his or her view on China will shift dramatically. So.
No, I think that's correct. I don't know how the trade war will play out. I'm not in the negotiating room. But the trade war it needs to be understood in the context of a larger scale competition between these two countries. And I think that will continue. And I think there will be more competition, not just between China and the US, but among many other countries like Russia, Germany. So we're in a new era where somehow I think Europeans, in particular, had this thought, I think it turned out to be an illusion, that somehow we're going to build this so-called liberal rules-based international order where everybody will operate under this set of rules and that's over. Now it's an era of everybody competes, everybody fights, and there's not going to be a set of rules that some countries respect. So we're going to see an era of hard power, unfortunately, and not because of. I think because of the failure of the soft power era. The soft power didn't deliver. These rules-based system didn't deliver for the people. And unfortunately, I wish they had delivered, but it didn't. So we're in an era of hard power competition. And Europe is in a very tricky position because Europe had not believed in hard power.
That is correct. I mean, Europe only recently started thinking about, only after President Trump really forced Europe to think about their own defense budget and strategy did we really start considering it more seriously. But I mean, isn't this situation dramatically different from the one that we had during the Cold War when we had two superpowers? One was completely autarkic and practically wasn't really communicating with the world. Now we have like, a marriage between two superpowers with interlinked supply chains, with interlinked economies. So, I mean, this marriage cannot easily be broken, right?
It cannot be easily broken, but it could be damaged. And I think the U.S. now is, I think the current U.S. leadership is wanting to draw down an iron curtain of some kind to decouple with China and other economies too. Because, and I don't blame them, I think the U.S. has great advantage, great strengths to compete and win in a world of an era of what I call warring states. That's a period in Chinese history where everybody fights for its own interests, okay? And China will fight for its interests too. But I think that will be unsettling and risky period. I think we ought to be looking to reconstruct a more peaceful world order. And I think China's proposal needs to be heard.
Mm-hmm. And a paramount Chinese leader, Deng Xiaoping, once said that China should kind of lay low and bide their time, essentially implying that China still has a lot to catch up. Now, obviously, this was decades ago. In 2008, during the global financial crisis, many of the leaders of the West were traveling to Beijing in hopes that Beijing continues buying the government bonds of both the US as well as many European countries. Do you think China overplay their hand by being a little bit overconfident from interpreting the global financial crisis of '08 as a major decline of the West, especially of the US. So, in other words, like, what is China now a little bit surprised with all this backlash that's happening, especially coming from the US?
I think it's the opposite. I think China was too timid. I think China didn't realize the tremendous earthquake of the 2008 financial crisis. I think China didn't see how fast the Western political institutions were decaying, how much incredible dissatisfaction there is in developed countries, how rapidly the social contract in America has been torn apart. China didn't realize that. So I think China underplayed its hand instead of overplayed it. I think China should have been more forward in proposing its ideas to the world, how we should continue to interconnect.
Yeah. But from what you say, I get a feeling that, you know, the West is kind of has the political system to blame for the fact that it completely made the middle classes of the West miss out on the benefits of the globalization. Now, if that is the case, then why are they so angry at China and not at their own political?
Yeah, I think the anger is misplaced. Like I said, if you look at the numbers, the US and Western countries benefited just as much, if not more, than China. It's the problems within those countries. The benefits only went to the very few. And a large number of people came out worse off or stagnant. And most people feel less secure. Most people feel they've lost control of their destiny to nameless, faceless global institutions like the EU. You know, I was talking to a friend of mine about the euro, and he was an economist. You're not in the euro, I guess.
No, not yet.
Not yet. And the globalists don't understand there's something more important than money. All the globalists could see is money, 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 money. And the economists, you know, gave me a list of the benefits of the euro, okay, economic benefits. I said, well, look, that's all good, but I don't care. I would not want to be a citizen of a country in which I take out my wallet, I take out my currency, and I don't see my hero, my national hero's picture on it.
Wow, have you ever heard of venture capitalists talk this way about money? How do you get your investors to invest? I mean, with this kind of enlightened perspective.
No, I mean.
No, that was a joke.
So people are more complex than that. People need dignity. People need community. People need the sense of belonging. People need cultural integrity, civilizational integrity. So I make a pitch: don't join the euro.
But then what role do you think China has to play in promoting the alternative form of globalization? Because if I understand you correctly, I mean, the main message of China's, let's say, view of globalization is that, you know, the value system cannot be exported, and then every country should kind of...
Countries need to be able to develop in their own ways. And China wants to take its excess capital and its capacity to build. The Chinese have learned one lesson in the last 40 years. It went from an agrarian poor country into a behemoth. And there's one lesson they learned. It's called, I heard it everywhere. I hear it, you know, people talk about in China. If you want to get rich, build a road.
Build a what?
A road.
A road.
Yes. So infrastructure-led development. And infrastructure meaning not just physical infrastructure, but digital infrastructure as well, right? Mm-hmm. So China is trying to take that idea and say that, okay, we're going to take our excess capital, excess capacity to build infrastructure be it physical or digital, in countries that are connected to the Chinese economy, so that we could increase interconnectivity this way between China's economy and their economies. That's what the Belt and Road is about. I mean, I remember 5-6 years ago when I started building, I was in Chongqing and saw the terminals. It was gigantic, and now it's straight to Madrid, to London, okay? So along the route, obviously it will improve trade, improve investment environments, and hopefully bring development and prosperities in those countries, and hopefully it'll come back and benefit China, okay? But it's up to those countries to decide how they want to do it, and how they want to run their countries, how they want to run their politics and their economy. And they could, for instance, Malaysia. China had these big projects in Malaysia, big financing, big borrowing, and they changed government. Prime Minister Mahathir came to power, and he said that some of those deals were not good deals for Malaysia. So they renegotiated. China cut the price by a third and changed certain aspects of the transaction. And they're back on track. So the Chinese are saying, you decide how you want to run your country. And you're a sovereign power. We're not going to impose our standards on you.
You've traveled to Africa a lot. You are on a board of China Europe Business School, and I think Ghana, right? And China has had quite a significant interaction with many African countries. What have you seen there from your experience?
Well, I mean, I think we've had a lot of successes there. We've also had a lot of problems. Chinese companies did not have a lot of experience expanding internationally, so they made mistakes, didn't hire local people. So there's solving some of those problems. They're getting used to it. But overall, I think China's development projects in Africa have been successful. I think the numbers I saw, don't quote me on it, you should double check the roads that we built in Africa in the last 20 years are more than all colonial powers in Africa combined did in the last 400 years.
Oh, that's an impressive number.
300 years.
Yeah,
Don't quote me on the number.
At this point, I'd like to
get the point.
I get the point, yeah. At this point, I'd like to open the floor again for some questions from the audience. There's one over there.
Hi, thanks, Mr. Li, on your talk. I'm Mate Čurić, and I come from one Croatian think tank, Center for Renewal of Culture. And we, as a free market and conservative think tank, could agree on some points that you made about globalism. My question would go on this globalization part. What do you think why China still doesn't allow Facebook, Google, New York Times, Instagram, and Wikipedia, for example, to just be allowed there? Thank you.
It's because we believe that each country should have the sovereignty to decide what kind of ideas dominate their society. I mean, we respect countries who don't believe that. You can let any ideas in if you wish, but we don't. We believe speech is a form of act, and just like any other acts, need to be regulated. We respect countries who say speech should be completely free. You can say anything you want. That's okay if that's how you want to run your country. But we don't believe that.
Yes.
Okay. My name is Stephen Bartulik. I teach political philosophy at a Catholic university here in Zagreb. I enjoyed listening to your remarks, and I would agree with you on the euro, for sure. I'm very skeptical about the wisdom behind this project, and it could lead to more fragmentation than unity among these countries, as Milton Friedman predicted before it was introduced. So I think there's much that we should learn from these countries that are in the Eurozone. But I wanted to go to a more philosophical question. So, as you know, in 1989, the countries in Central and Eastern Europe rose up against communism. You mentioned dignity and other things that you think should be respected. And the people in these countries, of course, felt that their dignity was not respected under these regimes. And they rose up, and many, of course, have not found their way, and many of these places have maybe stagnated, and the elites have not found the proper model how to advance since the collapse of communism. But it is true that someone I admire greatly, John Paul II, gave the people of Poland and other countries great encouragement to metaphorically take off the chains that were keeping them down and to rise up and demand their freedom and dignity. And it's interesting that since China's rise, I think the communists there have learned very much from this experience. So John Paul II badly wanted to visit China. He wasn't allowed, as you know, Pope Benedict as well. But Western capitalists, bankers, J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Apple, they're all welcome in China. So what does that tell us about, you know, this divide, or how we see human nature? It seems that the communists in China have more in common with Western capitalists than they do with people running the Vatican. And I think that tells us a lot about what's at stake in this game that we're describing. So thank you very much.
Good question, thank you. I think you're right. The revolutions in 1989 and early 1990s were driven by genuine national aspirations for the peoples of these countries to control their own destinies, okay? And to use your quote of John Paul II to liberate themselves from the shackles. Unfortunately, they put on new shackles, the new shackles of liberalism. That was my point, the new shackles of globalism. They went into a new model without considering their own national conditions. That's why they're still in the wilderness, I think. I think we want, I mean, I like to see a more pluralistic world where countries are able to say, okay, don't impose your values on me. Let us consider our own national conditions. Let us consider our own cultural conditions. And we're going to find a way that's suitable for us. And on the point of capitalism and capitalists in China, of course, that's what we meant. We have a vibrant market economy, and China has decided to engage globalization in its own way, on its own terms. So we engage and let in what we believe benefit us. We keep out what we believe will harm us, like this other gentleman raised.
So is really the Holy Father such a threat to the regime that if he would visit China, they would feel that it could undermine their authority, like it happened in Eastern Europe?
No, I think the current Holy Father will be visiting China soon.
Well, let's hope. Let's hope. I would like to see that.
But I would say that it's up to us to decide who can visit my house. I don't need someone else to tell me who I must invite into my house, into my living room. I don't like that. I don't think you like that either. I don't care what reason you give, what rationale you give, what moral lessons and lectures you're going to give. In my house, I decide purely on my discretion who can sit in my living room.
Yeah, well, and I want to follow up on that. I can completely understand that point, but over the last decade or so, I mean, the markets of US and Europe were, as they are, they're quite open, right? And they were also open to Chinese investments. And Chinese companies could easily go to Europe and buy one of the most significant food companies like Syngenta. No problems, right? As long as you have the money and you conform to the laws. The similar cannot be said.
Exactly. But look at those countries who did allow. Look at Russia.
Yeah.
Look at Georgia. Look at all those countries in the former Soviet Union. They lost all of their economy. Okay, their companies got bought up cheaply by foreign investors, by oligarchs. They lost their own entire economy. They have nothing now. Thank God we didn't do that.
No, I understand. I completely understand. Yeah. Was there one question over there? Yes.
Hi, Eric. Thank you for coming again for your talk. My name is Davor Tomic, and I'm an entrepreneur. I have a question on the political system in terms of how does China ensure that capital doesn't affect the political system? And also, what type of political systems do you see developing in terms of Europe and other Western countries? Because clearly this current political system, I'm not sure we'll be able to deal with the globalism that you've discussed, or dismantling it, and there will be a natural consequence of changing the political systems. So how do you see that developing?
I think, well, in China, obviously, it's a fact of the system that private capitalists are not involved in political decision making. They're allowed the space to make money. And they probably allow the space to have some influence over policies that affect their industries, maybe, but not even that. The China's political system is completely independent. It's called political autonomy, independent of economic and capitalist interests. There's corruption, of course, I'll give you that, but that's illegal. And how I see political systems evolving in Western countries, I think we're going to see more and more democratic movements against liberalism. So liberal democracy is breaking up inside. The liberal and the democratic are increasingly at odds with each other. As Hungarian Viktor Orban said, that he claimed that Hungary today is an illiberal democracy. So we're going to see democratic forces saying that we want to take our country back from liberal orthodoxy. I think that's what we're going to see in developed countries, including in America.
To follow up on that note, if we do go down that road, right, where you see more, I mean, and you kind of already see it. I mean, we have the European Parliament elections coming up here, and in many countries in Europe, you see these populist movements rising, and they just haven't completely aimed their crosshair at something. And then what you have is somebody like Steve Bannon, former advisor to President Trump, who comes to Europe and tries to frame China as the problem that all these populist movements should focus on. The Yellow West you mentioned, the five-star movements in Italy. I mean, isn't it the danger?
I think he's mistaken, and I think the Europeans are too smart to buy that story. You know, they're in Italy, but Italy is the first developed country to sign up to Belt and Road Initiative with the current nationalist, if you want to call it a populist government. And I don't think Hungary is buying that story. You know, so it's okay for him to believe that, but I think he's mistaken. Like I said, they made, the US made just as much money, if not more, than China. So they did, you know, it's how the money was distributed inside those countries that was the problem. Well, you can't blame the Politburo, the Chinese Politburo, how they divided up their money, their profits. The Chinese Politburo didn't have a say in that. And I think Europeans understand that. And I think most Americans would understand that too.
Yeah. Any other questions from the audience? Yes, over there. Oh, can you just take the microphone?
Hi, my name is Ivanka. I teach here at ZSEM. So maybe going back to the first presentation with those maps of 16+1 initiative and foreign direct investments of China to Europe, we saw that the countries of 16+1 initiative have very low level of FDIs. So you as a venture capitalist, how can you comment on that? And what's the opportunity that you see both for Chinese entrepreneurs and those of the 16+1 initiative in that context?
I think the gap is the opportunity, right? Certainly, Chinese economic engagement with Europe has been broad and deep with big numbers, but it's been mostly concentrated in Western Europe. The Eastern Europe and Central Eastern European country had lagged behind significantly. But I think that's the opportunity. I think, obviously, when East European Balkan states, when they joined the European project, their economies are geared towards integrating with Europe, and that's natural. But I think we're in a new era where I personally think Europe is falling apart. The European project has run aground. And it's not going to get fixed in any short period of time. So the economic gravity is going to shift. I think you will be much better off developing alternatives instead of continue this headlong integration into a Titanic, a sinking Titanic. You might want to find a few more boats. And I think that's my pitch to you.
Any other questions? Yes, over there in the back.
Hello, my name is Amir. So just briefly, let me give you a story about Croatian and Croatian economy. So in
briefly.
Briefly. In 1945, we embraced socialism. Like China today, and our government decided to build roads and to build industries like China today. And in the next 30 years, the country began to grow. So like China, our GDP will grow like 10 times. This whole city actually grew like 5 times in 30 years from 1945, to 1975, let's say. But what happened after that time is actually that we began to stall, and our economy began to stall, because the current regime in socialism and the capital allocation didn't work anymore. And for 10, 15 years, 20 years before the transition, which wasn't only about the people, it was also about the economy, because the economy could not find a way to grow further. Looking at China today and looking at Croatia back then, the reason for the GDP growth was not only that we experienced great leadership in the socialist parties, because the people came from the villages to the cities, and most of them just increased productivity because they were living in the cities, similar like we have in China today. So what makes you confident that China isn't just lagging what happened in Croatia 30, 40 years ago? Because looking at China today, you have 30 or 40 years of growth, and an excellent growth. As you said, you raised hundreds of millions of people from the poverty. But what makes you confident that actually the way that China is operating today won't hit a wall in 10, 15 years, especially when we look at the Chinese finances, the growth of debt, capital allocation, and everything that we are thinking about today. And actually, when looking at the Socialist Party and reforming the country, do you believe that China could do the same as Croatia did in the 90s, to transition from socialism to democracy? Is this something that would a Chinese party do if they feel that this is best for Chinese people? Thank you.
Well, it's interesting to hear your recounting of Croatian experience over the past half century or more. We had the similar experience. In the first 30 years of the People's Republic, from 1949 to 1979, we had a strict socialist system, 5-year plans, central planned economy, Some people say it's a failure. I disagree. We built tremendous basic industrial infrastructure. In 1949, our life expectancy was 41 years old. I've already lived past that, okay? And in 1949, our literacy rate was less than 15%. And our child immunization rate was like below 1%. Electricity coverage only covered maybe less than 5% of the country, mostly in top few cities. Okay? In 1949, we were much, much, much poorer than you. Much, much poorer. And after 30 years of socialism, total socialism, what I mean, we made a lot of mistakes, like Great Leap Forward, Cultural Revolution, but the successes are tremendous. In 1979, our life expectancy is already well in the 60s. Our literacy rate was 85%, which means 100% of young people, okay? And our immunization rate was 100%. Electricity coverage, China is a huge country, is above 80%, okay? So I would argue without this socialist period, we would have never taken off after the Deng Xiaoping era with market reforms. An interesting thing that people discovered was when we started building these cities and building those highways in the last 40 years, Chinese migrant workers who came from the countryside, migrant workers who never finished, just barely finished elementary school, could read an engineering drawing on how to build. So we had a highly educated population, even at a very low GDP per capita. In fact, if you check the UNDP, United Nations Development Program, called Human Development Index, in 1978, at a very, very low GDP per capita, China's Human Development Index was approaching those of developed countries. Okay, but we had that, yet our economy stalled. It couldn't go further. We had this, so we changed, we reformed. We said, okay, we're gonna keep what was good about socialism. We still continued the 5-year plan, but in a different format, obviously. It's not totally command economy. And we brought in tremendous market elements, market characteristics. Pricing was allowed to be determined on the margin by market forces and gradually opened up market and trade. So those are the last 40 years. In the next phase, in the next 30 years, we faced a different set of challenges. We've grown tremendously, but our inequality has increased. So that is on top of our political agenda. We're worried about productivity, yes, but we're more worried about sharing the prosperity. We don't want to leave people behind, like the liberal globalists did in the rich countries. We don't want to do that. So the idea is to eradicate absolute poverty, and we're well on our way. In the next 4 years, we have, I think, 30 million people left living beneath the absolute poverty line, defined by whether it was the World Bank or whatever the organization is. And we, in the next 3-4 years, we're going to take that to zero. Okay, even rich countries cannot do that, and we're still a developing country at only 10,000, maybe 11,000 US dollars GDP income per capita. We're going to take our absolute people under absolute poverty line to zero in the next 3-4 years. We need to expand our healthcare coverage. We need to redistribute the gains in the last 40 years from economic growth. So those are the priorities. And that's the new era. And so I'm predicting a shift relatively away from capitalistic approaches to more socialism in China. So we've swung from total socialism in the first 30 years to Deng Xiaoping's market reform and more, not capitalism, but capitalistic approaches. And I think in the next 30 years, we're shifting back a bit to have more socialism.
There's one question over there. And then
yes, I would like to, I'm coming from one of the Croatian banks. At first, thank you for very very dynamic and interesting speech. I think that we heard many interesting and useful information. I personally agree with some of them. I don't agree with all of them. But my question was related to your opinion on EU. You said that it is falling apart. So I would like to ask your opinion, why do you think so? And secondly, if this is going to be the case, how do you see and what could be alternative for a small country like Croatia is? And maybe just small comment at the end of the day, how do you comment these happenings regarding Huawei?
Look, from an outsider, I'm not a European, so I'm speaking outside my expertise, and I'm just looking from the outside in. Okay, you tell me if that's true. Okay, why is Europe falling apart? I put the question back to you. Who are these people in Brussels? Do you know them? I can't even remember their names. They're taking these volumes and volumes of books and rules that they're looking at this and, oh, number 17, number 18, you do this way. You do it that way. Someone may not even be being into your country. Okay, I think that's why Europe is falling apart. It's too top down. The peoples of Europe, of the European countries, have given away too much power, that they've lost control over their own destiny. I mean, with the euro, for instance, I mean, countries like Greece and Italy cannot even re-engineer their economies when they face tremendous challenges because they're locked into this currency that's not theirs. That's not connected to their economic realities. I think that's why Europe is falling apart.
One more question over there.
Hello, my name is Miljan Košimić. There's one question I need to ask regarding, your idea of pluralism, because you have mentioned pluralism several times, but it seems to be a pluralism of nation states rather than pluralism of people inhabiting these nation states. So if history has taught us anything, it's that as people get better off economically, they increase demands for more political rights. So does China have a fail-safe or some kind of a strategy to face these demands for democratization that are likely to gain currency as people become better off, other than say things such as increased control in terms of social credit system or some more violent measures? Thank you.
I think you don't have to wait to be rich for people to demand control over the destiny of their country. Rich and poor countries, people assert themselves, and I think that's a good thing. And people are doing that in America, people are doing that all over Europe. The British people just did that in the referendum. Okay, the people in Poland are demanding their borders back. People in Hungary are demanding their borders back and their control of immigration. The people of Hungary and Poland are demanding their own control of their judicial system instead of following the diktats of foreigners in Brussels. Okay, this is what the people are demanding. And whether a government or political leadership can survive in the long term depends on whether they answer the will of the people. So the test is in history. So the Chinese Communist Party is still in power in 2050. That will mean that they've answered the demands of the people. Otherwise, they'll be overthrown. Just like the liberals in Europe, everywhere, are being overthrown because they've refused the demands of the people. They only care about the capitalists. They only care about their liberal values. And they refuse the cultural integrity of the lands of the people who live in them. So you mentioned pluralism. Yes, I do believe that pluralism among cultures, among civilizations, is the preeminent thing, because culture is the primary driver of human civilization. So culture is the fundamental entity of how we organize ourselves. And within culture, it's up to you. You want pluralistic within your culture, that's okay. But it's okay for another country, another culture to say that we only want this kind. It's okay too. And I see many movements inside European countries who the people in those European countries want to say no to Brussels, who wants to impose liberal values in their own countries. They're rising up.
Maybe one last question, okay, over there.
Hello, my name is Mladen, and at the moment I'm a ZSEM student. I'd like to ask you, Mr. Li, what and how you see the cooperation and collaboration between China and Croatia in the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, I hope, although I know you have limited quantity, but I hope you sell more wines to us.
Dmitry, okay.
It's the best.
Only that?
It's amazing. I love the wines. And I hope you have, I see more Chinese tourists in Croatia. I was in Dubrovnik yesterday, and it's a beautiful, beautiful place.
Did you see the bridge?
Which bridge?
The one that the Chinese company.
No, I haven't seen the bridge. I want to drive on the bridge.
It's not completed yet, but
yeah.
But when it's completed, then you can come and drive.
Good.
Over.
More Chinese tourists, more Chinese drinking Croatian wines, and I hear olive oil is the best. It's amazing. I didn't even know about this. It's better than this Italian and Spanish olive oil. I'm telling you. Okay, and the Chinese don't know that. Okay, you need to tell the Chinese about your olive oil, okay? And minerals, amazing minerals, we need that. And you're in a strategic location along the trade route, so you need to take advantage of that. We have, like I said, infrastructure is not only physical, but also digital. I have this initiative to study what I call the digital Belt and Road. So smart inventory, for instance, digital management of logistics, mobile technology, all of these things, I think Croatia could play a role in the larger cooperation, larger co-development between China and the European continent.
And maybe one last question from my side, since you mentioned the digital Belt and Road. I mean, the digital Belt and Road took a significant hit yesterday when President Trump put Huawei on a blacklist. A similar move that he has done to another Chinese company, ZTE. So, do you think Huawei can?
I think
is
Huawei
ready for this? Can it survive?
I think Huawei could survive. It's invested a lot in R&D. It obviously will hurt it in the short term, but it's okay. I mean, China is a big country. America is a big country. Chinese companies are big boys. They should be able to handle it. Some of them may get hurt. Some of them may even get better in the long term. It's an age of competition. But China wants to increase interconnectivity, especially with European countries. And that's where I think you will have a constructive and profitable role to play.
Eric, thank you so much for joining us here. It was a pleasure.